The printout sat on the glass table between them like a sentence. Marcus Reed watched the black ink outline of his badge number and the timestamp beneath it, as if the paper might rearrange itself into an alibi. The room smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and something colder, polished glass, office air conditioned to insistence. Outside, the city kept going, but inside the disciplinary chamber, time had tightened to the space between a beep and a silence. Your badge was logged at the secure corridor at 11:57 p.m., the HR manager said. She spoke into the silence like she was narrating a factual account and not a person's life. The sound of a single badge reader chirping in his memory, soft, decisive, felt far away and suddenly very near. Beep. Marcus could see it in his mind, in the lobby, in the pocket of his uniform, in the small rituals he moved through to get ready for night shifts. He could hear Daisy's laugh. He could feel the loop of his mop handle against calluses that never quite softened. Victor Lang leaned forward, elbows on glass, his tie knotted like a noose of procedure. His eyes were precise and cold, as if they were measuring not guilt, but the potential of a precedent. Claire Waverly sat a few seats down. She wasn't smiling. She watched them all in a way that kept things tidy, as if attention alone could render complexity into order. Marcus had never once seen her smile for him. Tonight, her face was an even plane. Her hands rested on the arm of her chair. Her silence had the shape of a decision. Marcus straightened his shoulders. "I was on the loading dock until midnight," he said. His voice was low, measured. It was the voice he used at work, the one that made the machines and the night hum feel less like threats and more like tasks. "I cleaned the hallway outside the server floor. I swept. I checked the vents. I locked the panel doors. I did my rounds." The HR manager droned through protocol. She talked about access controls and chain of custody, about how the logs didn't lie. Her language folded around Marcus like paperwork wraps around a body, neat, final. Victor's lips barely moved as he added his own clipped observations. He mentioned risk and precedent, and the need to set an example. Marcus looked at Claire. She didn't blink. For a second he thought she would rise, say something to cut through the procedural language, ask a question that made room for a person. But she only watched. The glass around them reflected the fluorescent ceiling and the three of them as if they were specimens under a lens. "How do you respond to this?" the HR manager asked. Marcus thought of Daisy, of the pink backpack slumped by their apartment door like a promise he had to keep. He thought of the rent marked in red on the fridge's calendar, the stack of invoices with tiny totals that added up to pressure. He thought of the way the building's hum matched the rhythm of his life, steady, mechanical, necessary. There was a dignity in being needed, in keeping the place running when others slept. He wouldn't let anyone erase that with an accusation printed on a page. I can't accept being treated like I'm disposable," he said. He felt something loosen, not anger, but refusal. "I'm not the kind of person you make an example of." Victor smiled thinly. "Then resign," he suggested. "Save us the trouble." Marcus looked at the badge printout one last time. Outside the glass, the city's soft noises pressed against the windows. He thought of Daisy's small hands, of the way she trusted him without question. He thought about what it would mean to fight this in a place that could drown a person in procedure. He thought about showing her that when the world wanted to make you small, you could still stand up. "I resign," he said. The words landed with a soft, terrible finality. Claire's jaw moved subtly. A shadow crossed her face that Marcus couldn't read. HR processed the resignation like a final instrument closing. Someone reached for the forms. The beep of a badge reader echoed somewhere in the building, a metronome that now marked what they were losing. If you want to see how this plays out, hit like and subscribe. In the cramped morning apartment, the sun found the dust motes and nothing else wanted to be small. The calendar on the fridge had July square twice, rent circled in red and annotated with a tiny hopeful scribble. D up. A pink backpack leaned against a chair, its zipper half open to reveal a stuffed rabbit with one ear flopped. Daisy Reed, 6 years old and all patience and curiosity, sat at the tiny kitchen table licking the last bit of yogurt from its cup like a ritual that made the mundane holy. "Dad, "Can I bring Mr. Rabbit to school today?" she asked, looking up from behind a curl of hair. Marcus tied his shoelaces, the knot practiced and quick. He always did it twice, a habit from a life that required carefulness. He listened to her. The way he listened had more silence in it than words. He straightened, picked Daisy up gently, and kissed her forehead. "Only if he behaves," he said, and she giggled. They moved through the morning like two parts of the same small world, Marcus grabbing his janitor's vest, slipping the keyring into his pocket, scanning the day's list pinned to the fridge. Report to loading dock, sweep level 3, check HVAC panels, after-hours security pass. A tiny ritual of preparation for a night that would be other people's oblivion and his responsibility. Daisy looped the backpack over both shoulders with the proud efficiency of a child with a purpose. When the sitter canceled that afternoon, Marcus did what he always did. He rearranged his night so it wouldn't upend hers. He called his supervisor, checked schedules, and decided he'd bring Daisy by the lobby during his shift change. It was a shorthand of survival. He'd keep work and home braided close, not because it was ideal, but because it was necessary. That afternoon, in the lobby's echoing atrium where light fractured off glass and marble, Daisy's pink backpack bobbed like a small, stubborn flag. Claire Waverly moved through the lobby with the kind of economy that made her seem to glide. She saw them, a man in a graying uniform curled around a child burdened with a backpack the color of childhood, and paused. The building's hum leaned into the moment, servers and ventilation and distant elevators combining into a soundtrack of everything that the place needed to continue. "You shouldn't bring her here," Claire said. Her voice was plain, not cruel, but it carried the weight of policies unspoken and reputations guarded. Marcus bristled, not outwardly, but in a way that tightened his shoulders. "She's my daughter," he said. He didn't need to explain why he had no choice. Daisy looked up, eyes wide. The pink backpack sat between them, an emblem of stubborn belonging. Daisy tugged at Marcus's sleeve. "He's trying to work for me," she said in a small, solemn voice, as if explaining the universe. Claire's gaze slid to the backpack and then back to Marcus. For a beat, she considered. Her hand rested on the banister, a little less removed than usual. "Make other arrangements," she said, the instruction soft but unyielding. Marcus met her gaze. He could have argued, could have told her about how evenings shifted when a child's laughter was part of the calculus. He considered the risks of refusing the order from a woman who kept an entire company's optics in her pocket. He chose a small dignity. "I'll take care of it." Claire turned away then, the movement neat and decisive. Daisy watched her go, and Marcus felt the press of a small person's faith against a world that often ignored the fragile. Later that night, when the core wing alarm blinked and the phones began to whisper in the secure operations room, no one thought of the small compromises that kept someone like Marcus on shift. The call came at dawn. Someone had noticed the anomaly in the core wing's traffic the night before. An unexpected outbound bundle, a handshake where none should have been. Overnight logs registered an access attempt with credentials that matched an on-site badge number. Someone in the security room penciled a theory. Maybe a contractor's module. Maybe a misread sensor. The security manager pulled the last pass list and found what everyone dreaded. The badge used was Marcus Reed's. They called him into the same glass room where the printout would later wait. The room seemed shrunk by the weight of explanation. Marcus sat across from the monitor again, the badge printout now central, hands folded on his lap. He felt the look of someone trying to rearrange a life on a sheet of paper. "You can either explain this," Victor said, voice like a scalpel, "or you can resign." Marcus thought of Daisy waiting in their small apartment. He thought of how staff like him were easy to move aside when expediency demanded it. He thought of the slow, bureaucratic erasure of people whose faces didn't appear in the building's annual reports. He felt the tilt of the world toward self-preservation, and knew that for members of the institution, a tiny decision could swallow a person whole. "I'm not the one you should be blaming," he said, quiet and precise. "My badge never left my pocket on that night." Victor's smile was a polished thing. "The logs prove otherwise." Marcus had no desire to litigate in a room designed to make individuals into data points. He'd learned how those rooms worked. He would not allow the company to take his dignity as part of a quick fix. "Then I resign," he said, again, but this time with the steadiness of someone setting terms. Claire's face did not change. She watched him as if reading a difficult paragraph in a book she had expected to be simple. After Marcus left, the building returned to its routine, lights humming back at their steady pitch, the badge readers continuing to call and respond. Marcus walked out and the world closed around his few things, a uniform bag, a small set of tools, and Daisy's pink backpack. He did not know then that Claire had watched more than anyone suspected. He did not know that she had seen him in the lobby, had seen the small exchange with Daisy, and had let him walk away that evening while she pulled pieces together in a way that would bruise all of them. To Marcus, her silence had been absence. To Claire, silence had been a strategy. A few nights later, after the hum of the building had returned to its usual steady pulse and Marcus had started the slow process of shifting his life outward from the place that had been both his security and his home away from home, there was a knock on the apartment door unlike any he'd expected. He opened it to find Claire Waverly standing in the hallway, her coat buttoned, the same composed face up close and humanized by the thin light in their stairwell. "I need to talk to you," she said. It was not an apology. It was not too many words. It was an admission of interruption. Marcus stepped aside. Daisy peeked from behind the couch, her rabbit clutched in both hands. She wore the pink backpack like armor. Claire looked at Daisy with an expression that softened something in her face Marcus rarely saw. "You're the girl from the lobby," she said, as if by mentioning her name she could repair a ledger. Claire sat at their tiny kitchen table, and for a moment Marcus watched her as if he were seeing a different member of the building's apparatus. Not only the executive who made decisions carried out by others, but a person who moved inside choices with consequences. "I watched you that night," she said quietly. "I saw you with your daughter." Marcus felt the room tilt. "You watched me?" he repeated. She nodded. "I let you go because I thought—" Her hands curved in a way that made the argument visible. "I thought I could trace it. I thought if you got dragged into this now, it would be harder to find who was doing this." The confession landed like a stone dropped into a still pool. Claire was not offering salvation. She was offering strategy and the inconvenient truth that her silence had been tactical. Marcus felt both anger and a peculiar cold relief. At least someone had seen him. At least someone in that room had chosen to act in a way that kept him whole for the moment. "You watched me get framed," he said. She flinched at the word framed and admitted without fanfare that she had seen a shadow on the security feed that night, a flit of someone by the core wing. She'd noticed a badge transfer that didn't make sense and a pattern that suggested deliberate misdirection. But she had been weighing outcomes, reputation, containment, the company's investors, and decided to buy time to uncover the real perpetrator. Time, she thought, would let the trail reveal itself. Marcus listened. He felt his agency return as the contours of a different fight came into view. Claire asked for his help. She wanted access to the building as someone with intimate knowledge of its roots and blind spots. She wanted him to walk the way he always had around the building. But this time in partnership, not as a suspect. Marcus set his condition like a hinge. "I'll help," he said, "if you stop being silent when it matters. Not just this once. If you want me, the company has to stop hiding behind paperwork when people are getting hurt." Claire met his gaze and listened. She weighed her own code of devices, reputations, shareholders, against the human cost. In that kitchen, with the hum of the hallway and Daisy's rabbit between them, she slowly nodded. "No more silence," she said. It was the small forming of an agreement that would make history inside a building that loved its comfort. They moved like conspirators with different motives. Claire authorized a discreet review of footage. She asked for extra frames and angles not normally preserved. She reached out to Nana Park in compliance. Meticulous, soft-spoken, with a way of reading logs that made invisible patterns visible. Nana agreed to run cross-references while keeping the inquiry as quiet as a thing in a hold. Marcus, meanwhile, took to walking the building with his mop like a man who owned its smells and scuffs. He watched the routes others ignored. He counted how the light hit the server doors. He learned the places that cameras missed. The investigation felt like assembling a puzzle made of small betrayals. Naina's work was patient. She lined up logs and timestamps and found patterns in the hum. She compared badge reads to camera angles and asked the small, relentless questions that unspooled craftier lies. Claire used her executive weight to pull resources that could reframe a narrative in the building's favor. She did not do it as charity. She did it because she recognized that trust mattered where the building's image depended on people who were seen and those who were not. Daisy, who carried the pink backpack with an unassailable calm, became an unwitting witness. Kids noticed things adults taught themselves to ignore. One afternoon, as Marcus pushed his cart through the corridor near the secure wing, Daisy stopped and sniffed air like a small animal. "Smells like flowers," she announced, wrinkling her nose. Marcus frowned. The scent had a hint of something sharp, a cologne with a bright floral note that didn't belong in server corridors. It lodged in Marcus's memory like a detail in a photograph. Later, when they reviewed a grainy clip from a service corridor camera, Claire and Naina froze a frame and scrolled. In one tiny blink of video, under fluorescent glare, a glint flashed on a man's hand, a ring catching the light as he adjusted something near the badge reader. Naina slowed the clip, played it frame by frame, and then ran it against other footage. The ring's glint repeated, a small flash in different locations, always near areas where credentialed access seemed to go awry. The floral scent Daisy mentioned was not something Naina could log, but it was a human observation that fit the pattern of a person moving through the building with an edge of carelessness. Naina traced a curious anomaly in the access logs. There were credential handshakes that paired with expected reader beeps, but did not align perfectly with the motion archives. Some reads happened on a slightly different frame than the video would show a person in that space. That discrepancy suggested an insertion, something that could spoof a badge's signal so that it appeared valid in the logs while the real holder was elsewhere. They found a small device in a trash compactor behind the service elevator. Not because someone had a map to it, but because Marcus had a muscle memory for where staff threw away spent parts. The object was an innocuous black box with a scuffed edge, the kind of thing a janitor might throw away without thinking of its inside. Naina examined it, turning it as if it were a specimen. She described it without jargon, something that could mimic a credential signal for a short time and then hand it off. It fit the anomalies. It accounted for timestamps that clicked into the logs without the corresponding person standing at the reader. Claire kept her face contained. She didn't like the implication of the device, that someone with access to resources and motive had weaponized the company's own systems to frame others. She and Naina dug deeper. They cross-checked who had access to that compactor area, who had the opportunity to attach such a device under the cover of night. Marcus recited routes, places where a man walking a mop cart would appear as ordinary. He told them about a maintenance closet on the 4th floor that didn't show much on camera, about a supply room that had a blind spot. Victor's face kept surfacing in the margin of possibilities, like an assumption that refused to be ignored. The investigation sharpened. They discovered outbound traffic from the core wing at odd times, small bundles of data that could be moved but were not documented as part of any scheduled transfer. No lawmen were involved. This was internal accounting of packets and handshakes, an audit that had to stay closed to avoid panic. Naina framed the evidence carefully. Logs aligned with camera frames, the device's partial signature matched a pattern of spoofing, and there were repeated instances where low-level employees' credentials matched access events that the person could not possibly have executed. Then a late-night security clip offered a decisive frame. Victor Lang, alone near the core access panel, adjusting something beneath the reader as if he were making the badge do what he wanted. He wore his ring. In one frame, the ring flashed just as the floral cologne caught the light from a hallway lamp. It was a small human detail, but human details mattered. Claire felt something shift, a private contempt at a man who would weaponize systems and people to secure his elevation. Confrontation required choreography. Claire did not want a messy internal trial in which her credibility could be questioned. She also did not want to be the figure who stormed in and declared a victory. The building was a company built on optics and order. She had to use those same instruments to set things right. She called for a board meeting, a glass room staged for ritual accountability. Marcus had asked not to be hidden again. He wanted to be seen. Claire agreed that the moment had to publicly correct the record. In the boardroom, Glass walls let light slice across the table like a truth-teller's blade. Shareholders' portraits and quarterly graphs hung with a kind of polite distance. Claire began with the architecture of evidence: patterns, timestamps, footage frames. She let Nana present the technical thread, in lay terms, because the room was full of people who needed explanation, without being overwhelmed. And then slid in the critical frames: the ring's glint, the floral smell recounted by a child, the device found in a compactor that matched the anomalies. She showed how the badge reads had been spoofed, and how that pattern repeated across multiple incidents in which lower-level staff were scapegoated for incidents that traced back to a pattern of one man's access and motive. Victor's face shifted from controlled to razor-thin. He tried to parry with corporate verbiage to suggest coincidence, to point to process. Claire's questions were clinical, her demeanor not triumphant but insistent. Marcus sat, hands folded, not an accuser, but a witness. He felt the vice of attention turn away from him, and toward the man who had used the institution as a shield. The glass that had once enclosed him now reflected vindication. "You set him up," Marcus said after Claire finished, not as an indictment but as a fact. He looked Victor in the eye. There was no need for theatrical flourish. The evidence was a line that didn't bend. Victor's composure cracked precisely enough that people noticed. He stammered, tried to recast the narrative as administrative confusion, as the act of someone making a bad decision in the interest of protecting company assets. But the frames were there. The device signature matched movements only he could have arranged. The floral scent recounted by a child, when paired with the ring's flash in the footage, made a human pattern that the logs alone could not refuse. The board took action. Victor was relieved of his duties pending a formal review. He was escorted from the building by security, not through a drama of public spectacle, but like a man whose keys stopped fitting the doors they once opened. Claire corrected the record internally and instructed HR to reinstate Marcus to his role. She credited the work of Nina and explicitly acknowledged Marcus's dignity and cooperation. She did not single-handedly save him. She acted within the corporate architecture she ran, using her authority to unfurl the truth that others had tried to fold into neat fiction. Still, the moment was complicated. Claire stood in the aftermath with the knowledge that her earlier silence had almost allowed an injustice to be cemented. She had watched Marcus, let him walk for reasons she thought strategic, and had weighed the cost of that choice. Now she faced the moral arithmetic of accountability. How to repair the harm without pretending it had not nearly been allowed to stand. She made visible the decision she had earlier kept private. It was not an act of personal heroism, so much as the exercise of duty she had been entrusted with, and one she accepted publicly with flaws made plain. Marcus returned to work with conditions. He negotiated terms that protected not only his position, but others who might be vulnerable. He insisted on a direct line to compliance for reporting suspicious access and for protection against perfunctory scapegoating. Claire agreed to a structural change, more stringent oversight on who could authorize access devices, a transparent appeals procedure for accused staff, and an internal channel that elevated concerns directly to compliance rather than filtering them through layers that could be influenced by personal agendas. Marcus's acceptance of reinstatement was not a triumph of forgiveness alone. It was a reclamation of dignity on his terms. Daisy watched the building as if it might be a place that had something to learn about heart. The pink backpack was once again a visible thing, its presence like a small flag of belonging. When Marcus returned to the lobby that morning, he felt the hum of the building differently. The servers still whirred, the badge readers still chirped, and the glass still reflected a world that could both bruise and be corrected. But now the hum had a new timbre, softer perhaps, a cadence that felt more like accountability than indifference. Claire approached them in the lobby. She carried no speech this time, just a small book from her bag and a look that was less formal and more human. Daisy blinked at her, then reached out, perhaps with the uncalculated kindness of a child who has seen justice done and wants to believe in people again. Claire crouched, level with Daisy for a beat, and the two shared a glance over a rabbit ear. There was no forced affection, only the beginning of an understanding. "Thank you," Marcus said simply to Claire. It was not an absolution. It was recognition that in that building's machinery of silence and spectacle, she had chosen to act. Claire nodded. "You held your ground," she admitted. "You showed us something the logs couldn't." Nena, whose quiet labor had filled the spaces between suspicion and proof, was acknowledged in the meeting minutes and in Claire's remarks. Victor was subject to further corporate action. The company set a small list of reforms to shield staff from being easy currency in internal games of risk. None of it was perfect. None of it pretended to be. The institution remained a place that needed constant tending, but the contours of accountability had shifted in a meaningful way. Marcus did not return because the building now smiled at him. He returned because the terms were his, because he had asked for structural protections that recognized dignity as policy and not just sentiment. He wanted to teach Daisy by example that you could refuse erasure, name injustice, and shape the terms of your return. On a quiet evening, months after the printout sat like a sentence on a glass table, Marcus and Daisy walked through the lobby like ordinary participants in a world they were choosing to inhabit. The badge reader chimed when Marcus passed. Beep, the usual sound of permission and entry. The hum of the servers underlaid everything, but this time it felt less like a threat and more like a heartbeat. Insistent, mechanical, but carrying rhythm that could be learned to respect human life. Daisy tugged Marcus's sleeve and pointed toward Claire, who sat by a window reading. The CEO looked up and gave a small, rare smile. Daisy waved with the unfettered generosity of a child who had seen adults make a mistake and then try to repair it. Claire waved back, tentative, as if practicing kindness in a building that often preferred certainty. As they walked past the glass, Marcus glanced at his reflection and then at the reflected faces of the people inside. He saw someone who had been accused and had refused erasure. He saw the pink backpack, an emblem of a life that insisted on being visible. He saw Nena's calm diligence and Claire's conflicted choice. He saw a room of people learning that institutions break and mend along the same seams. He had been framed. The frame had almost held. But a set of small witnesses, a child's nose for a scent, a ring's flash in grainy footage, a compliance officer's patience, and a CEO's decision to stop being silent, stitched a different outcome. The building would still hum, still have glass that reflected power, still hold rooms where decisions were made. But now, in one corner of that glass tower, the story of a black single dad who refused to be erased existed as an argument against erasure itself. That night, Marcus tucked Daisy into bed. She clutched the rabbit and talked about school as if nothing profound had happened, because in the mind of a child, justice wasn't a spectacle. It was a restored ordinary. Marcus turned off the lamp and watched the shadow of the apartment fall like a hand over them. He felt the tiredness that comes from doing the right thing when it costs you, and alongside it a quiet relief. Outside the building, the city kept its rhythm, unaware of the internal corrections a glass tower had made. Inside, the hum continued, but it had been taught a little by human insistence. Marcus had not been rescued so much as he had reclaimed his position in a system that had tried to make him invisible. Claire had not been a solitary savior. She had been an instrument of a messy, imperfect accountability that owed its shape to many hands. Nena's methodical work mattered. Daisy's small senses mattered. Marcus's refusal mattered most of all. He thought, as he often did, about the meaning of visibility. To be seen is not merely to be noticed. It is to be acknowledged as complex, as worthy of defense, as someone whose presence demands consideration beyond procedure. He had taught his daughter that lesson not with speeches, but by the choices he made. The choice to stand, to speak, to set conditions, and to accept a system that would change because it had been forced to reckon. In the lobby, glass reflected the evening light in thin bars. Marcus and Daisy passed through the threshold together, the badge reader's beep echoing like a heartbeat that had been taught a new rhythm. The pink backpack swung against Daisy's back, deliberate and unashamed. Claire, watching, felt a softness she hadn't admitted to herself before. The recognition that power without human regard corrodes everything it touches, and that to wield power well is to answer when someone points out the hurt. "Do you think they'll remember?" Daisy asked as they left. Marcus squeezed her hand. "They'll remember the story," he said, "and I'll teach you to hold your place in it." The building hummed on, servers spinning, badges chirping, glass catching light. The hum was not the same for Marcus anymore. It had been taught that people mattered beyond ledger lines. It was a small victory in a system that still preferred ease over reckoning, but it was real. It was restorative. It was, for now, enough. If this story moved you, share it with someone who cares about fairness, and leave your thoughts about workplace justice below.